Welcome to this lecture on international agreements on environmental safety. After this lecture, you will learn about the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Climate Agreement. The first known environmental law is the Edict of 1273, which prohibits the use of coal for heating London homes. Many years later, environmental safety issues have become an important part of international meetings, conferences, and forums. The United Nations Conference on Human Environment, Stockholm Conference, was held in June 1972. This international forum was the first to discuss the concept of sustainable development, which is now the most popular concept of human development. The Stockholm Declaration was developed, which established 26 principles of environmental protection and defined the priority aim of humanity: protection and improvement of the environment for present and future generations. United Nations Environmental Programme was also developed during the conference. World Environment Day, celebrated on the 5th of June, was established in honor of the conference. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in June 1992 was a development and ideological continuation of the Stockholm Conference. The decisions of the conference play a significant role in the development of global environmental safety. This conference defined obligations of the countries to achieve sustainable development. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, an agreement on general principles of action of countries on climate change, was developed. The main purpose is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic impact on Earth climate system. This convention was signed by 186 countries and started since 1994. This document recognizes that there are environmental problems. It was a progressive step for its time. In 1994, when it came into force, there was less scientific confirmation of the anthropogenic nature of climate change than there is today. According to the convention, development countries are responsible for priority actions. Developed countries were responsible for the most part of greenhouse gas emissions in the past. The same is true today. Therefore, it is expected that the main part of emission reduction measures will be taken by these countries. Additional funding should be directed to developing countries. Developed countries agreed to support measures to combat climate change in developing countries and provide them with appropriate financial support. The next important environmental agreement is the Kyoto Protocol. It is an additional document to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992. The main objective of the agreement is to stabilize the level of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic impacts on the planet's climate system. The Kyoto Protocol obliged developed countries to limit and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with agreed national commitments. The protocol was reasonable because the convention itself contains only recommendations for policies and measures to mitigate climate change. The Kyoto Protocol is based on the principles of the convention. It applies only to developed countries. This is due to the recognition of a primary responsibility of this group of countries for current high level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. One of the key decisions of the Kyoto Protocol was the creation of flexible market mechanisms based on emissions trading. The Paris Climate Agreement was developed in 2015 in Paris. The official title of the document is the Paris Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was supported by all 197 participants. This agreement replaced the Kyoto Protocol, and the aim of the Paris Agreement is to prevent the global average annual temperature increase on the planet by 2100 by more than 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level and do everything possible to keep the warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius. Currently, the average temperature is 0.75 degrees Celsius higher than in pre-industrial level. There are differences from the Kyoto Protocol. All countries, regardless of the level of their economic development, take responsibility for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not only developed countries. There are no specific quantitative commitments to reduce or limit CO2 emissions. Each country will determine its own policies in this area. There is no mechanism for strict control other its implementation. The document only gives the right to the commissions of international experts to verify the information provided by countries on their achievement in reducing CO2 emissions. It was expected that countries would start working together from 2020. It was necessary to agree on a set of rules for carbon markets and address a number of other issues. The nearly 27,000 delegates in December 2019 could not meet this task. Published in 2019, a report of the United Nations Environment Programme showed that the Paris Agreement countries plan to increase production of fossil fuels until 2040. The report highlights the gap between the declared goals to control global warming and actual government plans to produce more and more fuels. So, in this lecture, you have learned about the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Climate Agreement.